What's up, everybody? Matt Kajeski here, back again with the Stokastic DFS channel. And today we're talking college football DFS. It's a Thanksgiving hangover, the Friday slate, rivalry week. It's week 13, which means we have a full slate, not only Saturday, but Friday as well. We'll dive into everything you need to know. But before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you today by Prize Picks. And Prize Picks, they're a site that offers daily prop-based contests. You're making lineups of player props. It's overs, unders, touchdowns, passing yards, receptions. They have it. And it's not just college football. They have NFL, NBA, NHL, as well as many other sports. And you can mix and match these props in your lineups. You can use NBA and college football if you're an expert in both. Mix and match to your like. But even better yet, they have a first match deposit bonus up to $100. And they offer one free month of Stokastic plus platinum when you make your first deposit. So click the link in the video description below to check it out. And we've got two slates to dive into, so let's get into this. One last housekeeping note. We're recording this a little early just due to the holiday. And by the way, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. But if there's an injury situation that pops up or I missed one, that is why. Just very early recording. So hopefully we don't miss any, but just want to throw that out there. Let's dive in. All right. So this is our data usage tool behind the scenes. You've probably seen this before if you've watched these videos. We have an 11-game slate, I believe, on Friday. We'll kick things off with Tulane, Cincinnati. Whoever wins this game goes to the AAC championship. So a lot on the line. 2-point spread in favor of Cincinnati. Tulane's taking money. 47 totals, not ideal, but it's not terrible. Starting with the Tulane side, they're 71st in pace, a 42.5% pass rate. Michael Pratt is the signal caller there. He does have some upside, but he is now priced up at 7,300. He has 317 rush yards on the year, averages 221.5 as a passer. This is a run-based team for the most part, so he only averages about 27 attempts per game. There's a lot of floor here for Pratt, especially in a game with just a 47 total. So he's not my favorite signal caller, but the upside is certainly there. There's no security issues with Pratt, and the mobility is solid for him, but I think outside of tournaments, like for cash games, you could just do a little bit better than Pratt price-wise, but we'll talk about the rest of the guys later. He's live for tournaments. The run game, Tyjae Spears, his volume has not been ideal, but I mean, he's just been so efficient and they've been smashing teams. So I think when their chips need to be down in tight games, you're going to see Spears back up around the 20 carries we saw, in their fourth most recent game. There was a stretch of time this year where he was touching the ball 20 times easily. But last week, he just smashed so hard, so quickly. They did not need to continue using him. He's averaging over 6 yards per carry. Awesome pass catcher is Tyjae Spears. Love using him as a tournament play because he never gets priced up due to his workload. So he's somebody we can use. Expect more work when they're in competitive games, which 2-point spread we project to see here. And then Shady Clayton, Iverson Celestine are the backups. Not really too interested there. Their volume's good recently, but again, they've been smashing. The receiving game's tough to trust because they use 6 or 7 guys. Deuce Watts leads the team with 42 targets. He has 405 receiving yards. The actual receiving leader is Shea Wyatt. He has 523 yards, and that's come on 39 targets. In between Wyatt and Watts is Jaquan Jackson with 427 yards, but just 35 targets. They also use Day-Day McDougal, Lawrence Keys, tight end Tyreek James. It's pretty tough out here for these guys. I'm going to pull up routes just because I want to see if anyone missed the game. Again, this is more of a first look. I'm not done with projections for this slate yet, but looks like Day-Day McDougal might have missed the game. I'm going to pull this up. He didn't register a target, so that could be something to watch. I'll pull up Tulane's box score quickly, see if they did have him on the field for snaps. And it looks like he did, in fact, miss the game. So Day-Day McDougal, somebody to watch as a potential absence on this slate. Again, haven't done projections yet, but that's the only one I see here. Shea Wyatt, his routes were up at 94%. Holy smoke, Shea Wyatt with a massive route rate. Maybe Shea Wyatt's a little targetable in GPPs. Deuce Watts as well. Moving to the Cincinnati side. So over here, we have a big injury. First of all, they're 59th in pace, 50.5% pass rate, 54.5% pass rate, excuse me. But Ben Bryant was in a walking boot. Some said his season was over, and then it came out this week that he's questionable. Seems more on the doubtful side to me, but Evan Prater could step up here. He's the highest recruit in program history. Apparently, he hasn't lived up to that recruiting pedigree because he couldn't beat out Ben frickin' Bryant. But anyway, as a player, he's very mobile, which should give us interest in DFS. 113 rush yards on a very limited sample this year. Can't really take anything from his passing stats yet. And I do expect the offense to change a bit with Prater under center. The only issue is Luke Fickell just can't help himself from being conservative. Like he does it every potential chance he can get. So how much do they actually use Prater as a runner? That's a question I do have, but I like the mobility for him. Tulane plays excellent defense, but honestly, we need to save some salary on this slate. Going to Prater as a mobile signal caller could make sense. The backfield's just full three-way committee at this point. Charles McClellan, Corey Kiner now appears healthier, 8 carries after coming off the injury. And then Ryan Montgomery's played a lot recently, 15 carries and 10 carries in back-to-back games for him. That's just enough where I don't want to play McClellan. Earlier in the year, when people were hurt, McClellan did see a bell cow workload, but it's going to be a share to some degree. That's just GPP flyer territory. The receiving game, semi-interested here. Tyler Scott and Trey Tucker have been awesome for this team, especially Tyler Scott, who's averaging 89 yards per game on 8.2 targets. I always have GPP interest in him, but now with the quarterback change, does this volume go down? That's a question I have, and I don't feel confident enough where I want to just X out these receivers, but it's at least worth mentioning here. The routes last week, Tyler Scott, 98%. Trey Tucker is still down a little bit, 63% for him. He hasn't been at 80% in 3 straight games. And there's only one game in the last 5 where he's been at 80%. So that's a bit concerning. One thing to mention, Leonard Taylor missed the game, and it's basically a 50-50 rotation. Leonard Taylor and Josh Wiley at tight end, but without Taylor, Wiley jumped up to 95% of the routes. Just a massive workload for Wiley. 10 targets for Wiley. He could be usable as a GPP dart throw if this is the case again. And then wide receiver 3, Jaden Thompson, 71% of the routes. He actually ran more routes than Trey Tucker, so worth mentioning here. He's the wide receiver 3. Nick Mardner just back to rotational snaps. Not a lot of interest outside the big 4. And Leonard Taylor would be somewhat interesting if he were in. Baylor takes on Texas. This game has a 56 total, 9-point spread in favor of Texas. They've taken some money here. Baylor will start there, 81st in pace, 43% pass rate. Blake Shapen, game manager extraordinaire, has 104 rushing yards on the year, averages 219.5 as a passer. Just very little ceiling with Shapen every week. Now he draws a tough matchup in Texas's defense. Their implied team total is decent. I don't have a lot of interest in Shapen at this price. If I get to him, it's just a price thing. Backfield's now a 3-way committee. Richard Reese has been explosive on the year, but they just like Craig Williams more. Don't know why, but they do. Craig Williams, 20 carries. Richard Reese, 10 last week. Tough matchup. Going to be a timeshare. Quaylon Jones is the pass catching back. Not much interest overall, especially with Reese now nearly 6K. If I play one, it's going to be Craig Williams at 4.8, honestly. Receiving game is a disaster for the most part. Monterey Baldwin does have back-to-back games with 13 and 10 targets. The issue with Baldwin's been health, so seeing him finally appearing over the injuries is good. He's a GPP consideration in this price range just because there's better plays than him, more volume, better efficiency than Monterey. He averages 59 yards per game, so you can kind of see it's not the most efficient volume, and it's not always there either. Like sometimes Hal Presley gets targets, sometimes it's Gavin Holmes when he's healthy, etc. It's not clear that it's going to be Baldwin week in, week out. But in the receiving game, the routes, 91% Hal Presley, 88% Monterey Baldwin, tight end Ben Sims, 82%. And then Gavin Holmes got hurt, so we saw Josh Cameron. Everyone played him last week after his 90% route rate, but that dropped back down to 48%. They split him with, Kelsey Johnson played a fair amount as a tight end too. This team does use 12 personnel. So the wide receiver 3 is not always on the field. And then, here and there, some other guys like Cameron Bonner, 24% for Cameron Bonner. Anyway, Josh Cameron just doesn't have the locked in role. So he's tough to get to, as we talked about last week. Volatile. Texas, 32nd in pace, 46.5% pass rate is Texas. 32 team total is always going to give us viability here. Quinn Ewers is atrocious, at least in recent play. He's at 50% completion percentage since they played Oklahoma. He has a 5.8 yards per attempt. He doesn't run the ball, and he's averaging 200 passing yards per game. He's 7K. I'd rather play Shapen straight up than Quinn Ewers. He's one of the worst quarterback plays on the board. Only thing keeping him afloat for GPPs is that team total. And then in the run game, it's so clear that we want to get to Bijan. He averages 23.5 touches per game, 127 yards on the ground, another 28.5 through the air. Roshan got hurt last week. Roshan says he's going to play, so don't put too much into that. But the only issue with Bijan's price, it's a tight pricing slate. So Bijan at 93 is going to require concessions elsewhere. Right now, my tentative lean is to make those concessions, but we'll see come Friday. Again, we're recording this early in the week. I'm not entirely sure what I want to do because projections are not finished. But he's a great play. You can't poke holes in Bijan. Receiving game, Xavier Worthy, Jordan Whittington, and Jatavian Sanders are the top three options. It is very clear they have all the routes basically for this team. I'm going to pull it up quickly just to make sure it didn't change last week, and it did not. 96% Worthy, 96% Whittington, 92% Jatavian Sanders, rotation behind them. As far as price goes on this slate, Sanders still should not be cheaper than Whittington, in my opinion. He did only see one target last week, but 92% of the routes, I don't have a lot of concern there. They're cheap enough in price and volume where I don't really see the point in going up to Whittington, 500 more, unless it's just for leverage. They're both efficiently priced, as is Worthy at 6.6. Only 4 targets last week, but we know he's the alpha when it comes down to it. So I think everything's efficient here. I might end up playing 1 or 2 of these guys because they're usually efficient price plays in the mid-range. Utah State, Boise State. Best part about Friday hangover, Thanksgiving hangover is we get some games that aren't normally on the main slate. So Utah State, Boise State, weird game. 16.5 point spread in favor of Boise, 51.5 total. Can we play anybody on Utah State's the question? Their implied team total is 17.5, which isn't great. They do have a mobile signal caller in Cooper Lagasse, 227 rushing yards on the year, but he only averages 145 as a passer. A little bit of noise here just because they've been a revolving door at quarterback this year, but Lagasse looks like the guy. This team is 23rd in pace, and they run nearly 60% of the time. They have a 42% pass rate. So Lagasse is an outside consideration, I think, at 5,600 on the mobility. But ultimately, team total is really low. Boise State has a phenomenal defense. They should be able to shut him down. For the running back room, Calvin Tyler has a monstrous workload. He's averaging 21.3 touches per game, 89 rushing yards, and then 10 receiving yards per game. He had 30 carries in their last game. Now, this projects to be severe negative game script, so I would not expect 30 carries again. But Robert Briggs did not play a snap, which is key because he's been the change of pace back all year. There's not good beat reporting on this team, so maybe we hear about Briggs pregame, maybe we don't. But Briggs did not play a snap last week. I don't know if it's injury or not, just because they don't talk about it. And I didn't watch the game, so maybe somebody knows, but I don't. Regardless, Calvin Tyler is the lead back. He'd be a GPP option just because of workload. Game script, again, going to be working against him. Receiving game, pretty clear what this team's doing. 3 receivers play almost all the snaps. It's Brian Cobbs, Terrell Vaughn, Justin McGriff. Cobbs leads the team, 8.5 targets per game, 70 yards. He's efficiently priced. They all really are. Terrell Vaughn, 39.5 yards per game on 5.7 targets. And then you got Justin McGriff, 33 yards per game on 5.1 targets. Nothing fishy in the routes. It's exactly what you expect for a team that's very condensed. Those 3 guys on the field every single play, and then they rotate everything else. Brock Lane and Josh Sturzer rotate tight ends. No interest there. For Boise, you've got a massive team total at 34. It's pretty good on this slate. You have a mobile quarterback in Taylon Green. He has 346 rush yards on the year. Only averages 189 as a passer, which is a concern. He's 6,600, which is like $500 too expensive for him. But he still has to be in play just because of the mobility and the tight pricing. Right now, with all these like mobile quarterbacks that are game managers, I think I prefer Prater over them all just because he's cheaper and, they have the same skill set, but don't feel confident right now. I'd put Green in my GPP pool. In the backfield, you have about a 60-40 split. George Halani's direction over Ashton Genty. George Halani averages 21 touches per game, 97.5 rushing yards. He's good as a receiver too, 15 receiving yards per game for Halani. They just run the ball so much. It's sort of like an Ole Miss situation where, Genty's going to handle 30, 35% of the work, maybe 40% in times, but they run it so much that Halani's still going to touch the ball 20 plus times. It's a bit expensive for Halani. We're kind of getting into the range where at 7,900, I might just want to find the extra salary for like Bijan, but Utah State is allowing 5.1 yards per carry. Like Halani's a good play. Genty is a decent play as a tournament option just in the change of pace role as well. It's a very good matchup here. Receiving game, Very little interest. These guys are all way too expensive for their roles, especially in the new offense with Taylor Green under center. Nobody averages more than 36 yards per game. That's Stephen Cobbs. Billy Bones is second at 35. Latrell Capel's third at 33. Very little separates them in terms of targets. All of them are between 50 and 59. Not much interest, but those are the guys that actually play receiver for Boise. Moving to the next game. Another awesome game for the Friday main slate. I'm super excited for this slate. Central Michigan, Eastern Michigan. Eastern's the home team. 2-point spread in favor of Central. Central has a 36. They rank 36th in pace and they pass 50% of the time, but this has changed. And Daniel Richardson did not play much in the last game, a couple snaps. They split Burt Emanuel and Jace Bauer. Burt Emanuel barely threw, though. He essentially came out there, played like Wildcat. He's essentially like a glorified running back. And he had 18 carries. The dude has been absolutely unbelievable on the ground. There's a lot of noise in their last game against Western. It was that snow globe game, so they barely threw it. But honestly, that's going to be tough for them here. Like their run-based approach they've shown recently, because Eastern's strength on defense is the run defense. Now, you can't play any of the quarterbacks because all three of them likely see snaps. Even like Burt Emanuel, he would be awesome if he threw the ball at all, but you're essentially taking up a quarterback or a super flex position and playing him instead of another quarterback. So just a lot of opportunity costs with Burt Emanuel, even though I like him as a player. The run game, Lou Nichols has been basically ping-ponging between being out of games, being back in games, being out, being limited. I have no idea how healthy he is. I don't know what his role is. He was out-carried 18-10 by Burt Emanuel last week. That could happen again here. It's just very hard to trust any Central Michigan running back. Marion Lukes and Miles Bailey look like they're out. They used a safety, Jadavian Stepney, in their second most recent game because of injuries. Like, it's a freaking mess for this team. Lou would be the play if you could guarantee me his old workload, but I don't think we can do that anymore. Receiving game is a nightmare, and I'll just bring you to the routes because this team's not really throwing the ball much anymore. Some of it by design, some of it because of that snow globe game, but looking at the route rate, it's going to be Carlos Carriere, Jalen McGahee, and then they lost Joel Wilson. So Cade Conley's played a lot at tight end for this team. Their wide receiver 3 last week was actually Tyson Davis. So I think for 3 wide receiver sets, you see Carlos Carriere, Jalen McGahee, and then some combination of Tyson Davis and Finn Hogan. Tight end should mostly be Cade Conley. For those of you very, very risky GPP players, that's how it shakes out. I'd probably just look to like Conley or, it's really risky. Tyson Davis, 3,300 would be the cheapest I go. Eastern, they have a 45.5% pass rate. They're 83rd in pace. Austin Smith got hurt, so it looks like we're getting Taylor Powell. They're very different in terms of their skill set. Austin Smith has mobility, but Powell is definitely a better passer. He's just not mobile at all. Negative 87 rush yards for Powell. So right away, I think this gives us more stacking ability, but honestly, Samson Evans has had a monstrous workload on the ground. Touch counts, it's ridiculous. Touch counts of 27, 26, and 34 in the last 3 games. Central plays good defense, especially run defense, but I mean, with that workload, you're not scared. I think people aren't going to play these lower level competition, these smaller school backs, because everybody knows Bijan, everybody knows Halani, name your back of choice. People don't know Samson Evans unless you play Maction. So I'm interested there. Also interested in the receivers, Hassan Beydoun, Tanner Canu, Dylan Drummond. These guys have been solid for for Eastern Michigan for years now. So there's plenty of interest for me. Hassan Beydoun, 74% of the routes. Tanner Canu, 93%. Those are the guys I like most. And then they have rotated wide receiver 3 a little bit. It's been Dylan Drummond and Darius Lassiter. I still prefer Drummond, even though his route rate dropped to 60% last week. He'd been at 80% plus in the 5 prior games. Some of this because Lassiter's come on, but they also used Gunnar Oaks a lot. He had a 74% route rate. That's their tight end. To rank them, it's going to be 1, Beydoun, 2, Canu, 3, Drummond. Going to Toledo, Western Michigan, another MAC game. 7.5-point spread in favor of Toledo. 52.5 total. Toledo's quarterback, DeQuan Finn, is injured. He was in a walking boot last week. No update on his status. If he plays, very good play. 530 rush yards in the year, averages 215.5 as a passer on 29 attempts. Western Michigan is awful on defense. So DeQuan would make a lot of sense, but Tucker Gleason looks pretty decent too. He already has 159 rush yards. He looks like he's mobile. just 7,100. It's not really much of a drop off for a guy we don't know a lot about. So I have concerns with Gleason, but I don't think it's too bad for the offense. This team is rotating backs. They use 3 usually, but Micah Kelly has burst on the scene of late. So it's Jock Stewart, Penny Boone, and Micah Kelly. But Micah Kelly has carry counts of 17 and 16 in their 2 most recent games. He has touch counts of 19 and 21. He's 3,800. So even if Jock Stewart and Penny Boone carry a decent amount here, which they have, it's a very run-based team, Micah Kelly at 3,800 should be your salary saver, at least one of your options there. In the receiving game, it's Jerwan Newton, Devin Maddox, Demir Blankham, tight end, Jamal Turner. This team rotates, so I'm going to bring you to the routes. The most helpful thing, I think, when we get situations like this. So for Toledo last week, Jerwan Newton, 98%. He's the only locked-in guy. Then we had Devin Maddox, 66%. Demir Blankham, he's coming off an injury. So the last 2 games since he returned, 38%, 25%. There's a chance that rises just because Blankham, former starter in the offense. Early in the year, he was at like 85% of the routes, but injury-related for him. The guy who's replaced him is Michael Barkley, whose route rate was 67% and 38% last week. It's been a bit of a rotation. Thomas Zeros, however you say that, 33% to 58%. I think behind Devin Maddox and Jerwan Newton, you're rolling the dice with Blankham, Barkley, or Zerios. I'd rather just play the top 2 guys or tight end Jamal Turner, whose routes have been at 62% and 64%, but kind of risky here for the pass catchers. Going to Western Michigan, they have a 78th ranked pace. They pass 45% of the time. They've moved to Trayson Bourget under center, who's been improving for them. He actually has 154 rush yards on the year. Not much of a passer, but there's a ton of noise in these stats because of how many QBs they've used. He's 6,100, and he's actually been decent, especially as a runner. He has designed rush attempts of 7, 5, 5, and 9 in their last 4 games. He's not the worst play on the slate, just as a salary-saving QB. I don't hate Trayson Bourget. Very tough matchup for him, though. In the run game, Sean Tyler has a massive workload. Ladarius Jefferson's been suspended, so 19 touches per game for Tyler, 81 rush yards, and then 10 as a receiver. Efficiency is an issue for Tyler, but 6,900, bell cow workload. He's GPP viable. The receiving game is basically just Corey Crooms, and then the rest of it is a complete mess. Volatile, but we'll give you the routes as we do. So Corey Crooms, 100%. Jelani Galloway, 100%. And then we actually had Malik Dudana, saying that correct, Dudani. He was at 90%. That came at the expense of Anthony Sambucci. I'm not sure if this is injury related or not, but Dudana, 96% of the routes is unbelievably high. And then Nate Anderson, actually 48% too. They weren't using much tight end last week or really in the last couple weeks, but this mostly came at the expense of Sambucci. I'm going to go and look up this game quick, just make sure he was out again. First look. I'm not sure why they did this. It looks like Sambucci did not record a single snap. So that's an injury to monitor. If it's an injury, I'm not sure. Again, first look here, but just some information. Arizona State, Arizona. This game is awesome. 65.5 total, 4-point spread in favor of Arizona. Arizona State's 95th in pace, 55% pass rate. They've now moved to Trenton Bourget at QB. He's been a game manager for them for the most part. Couple good games against bad competition, diced up Colorado, but bad games smashed around that. UCLA, he played okay too, actually. He averages 222 yards per game, negative rushing yards for Bourget. Not too much interest at 7,700. I think it's just the game environment propping him up. The real guy we want to get to is Xavier Valladay if we can. He averages 21 touches per game, 99.5 rushing yards. Valladay's got to get an efficient game here to get that over 100. Then he averages 25 as a receiver. Valladay is awesome. Great pass catcher. 5.3 target per game average in the last 4. Love Valladay. In the receiving game, Giovanni Sanders has been injured of late, so that's kind of messed up his routes, but he's been solid when healthy. And last week, his routes were just at 33%. The week prior, 24%, but he'd been above 70 in 4 straight games prior to that. So I think with more health, Giovanni Sanders will get his routes back up there. But honestly, the one is still Elijah Badger. His routes are well above 80% consistently. Target leader for this team. Just 7K is a ton to pay for Badger. If we get good news on Sanders, I would rather play Sanders at a cheaper price. But with Sanders banged up, the routes have gone elsewhere. We've seen tight end Jalen Connors at 62%, Brian Thompson, 38%. Andre Johnson, 62%. Cam Johnson, 51%. Nobody really popping off here. If you want to take a flyer, Andre Johnson at 4,300, maybe. He's just still even too expensive at that price for this role. Tough to get to anyone outside of Badger or Sanders, assuming we get news on the health. For Arizona, 28th in pace, 60% pass rate. This is a good situation. Jaden DeLaura, 119 rush yards on the year, averages 317 as a passer on 38 attempts. He's 8,100, but he's stackable. The ceiling is there. DeLaura is completely fine. The backfield, 1 week after Wiley at 21 carries, we see it return to the timeshare. Wiley, Coleman, Williams, Rayshawn Luke, all four-way committee. Receiver, pretty easy here. Cowing's the 1, Singer's the 2. And then we have Tetero McMillan's the 3. And Singer might even be the 1 at this point. Singer has 1,014 yards. Cowing has 1,001 yards. Tetero McMillan, 702 yards. Targets do favor Cowing, so that's where I lean if you can get to him. But Singer and McMillan, awesome. Even Tanner McLaughlin, 4.2 targets per game, 39 yards. He's 3,700, completely fine. I'm going to stack Arizona for sure in multiple lineups. NC State, UNC, rivalry game, but not so great at this point. 6.5-point spread in favor of UNC, 56 total. NC State slow. Whoever plays quarterback is going to drastically shift their pass rate. Last week, of course, Devin Leary's been out, but they did not have MJ Morris. Ben Finley got hurt in the game, so they had to go back to triple option guy from Charleston Southern transfer, Jack Chambers. If he plays, he's going to have the NC State's going to have a high run rate. If they get Morris back, it should be closer to this 50% pass rate. And Morris was listed first on their depth chart. He's very risky, just a freshman, 88 rush yards, averages 130 pass yards, just a lot of noise there. The UNC defense is awful, so maybe in tournaments you could get to him, but don't have a ton of interest. Would have more interest in the backfield if Demi Sumo Karngbai was listed on the depth chart, but it looks like he's going to be out again. So Jordan Houston and Michael Allen will split the work here. Michael Allen's 4K. He's going to get like 10 to 15 touches, so that's potentially viable against a terrible UNC defense that allows 4.8 yards per carry. Pass game, very little interest with some of the changes they've been forced to make at quarterback. There's just no efficiency here. But if you want to look at routes, I will certainly give them to you. 83% Thayer Thomas, 74% Keon Lassane, 74% Daryl Jones. Devin Carter's missed the last 2 games. For what it's worth, he was listed on the depth chart. If he returns, that would likely hurt Daryl Jones the most. Porter Rooks, 57%. I'm likely to avoid this range altogether at their prices. The only one I have interest in is Lassane at 3.5 as a potential, GPP flyer, but it's not much interest. UNC, 16th in pace, 52% pass rate. Drake May is a stud, 597 yards, 326 yards per game. Tougher matchup for him, but he's diced up tougher matchups, and there's a chance he goes a little lower owned after a somewhat bad performance against Georgia Tech last week. Definitely not his best. So that's semi-interesting to me. They'll use Elijah Green in games that are competitive and positive game script. He's just 6,100, and Omarion Hampton and DJ Jones are still going to play here, so I don't have a ton of interest in Green. GPP viable. Receiving game's pretty easy. You've got Downs. Antoine Green, if he plays, he's questionable here. He'll be the 2. And then from there, it gets a little interesting with North Carolina. Because they've had so many injuries, they've had to rotate guys. So to break it down, let me pull up the routes here. A little behind on this. Downs, he's exactly where you'd expect. Antoine Green, massive route share when he's healthy. And then J.J. Jones is the wide receiver 3. Pretty clearly, he obviously gets a target share bump without Green, but his routes have not wavered over 90% in the last 4 games. The receiver that played in place of Antoine Green was Gavin Blackwell. 88% of the routes for Blackwell. So if we get news that Green is out, Blackwell would become cheap play of the day, 3,600. They rotate tight ends, but it's going to mostly be Bryson Nesbitt. He had a 59% route rate last week. You'll just see like Copenhaver and some other guys play too. Kamari Morales, whoever's healthy. Not clear who's the number 1 any given week there. Arkansas, Missouri, pretty fun game here. 55.5 total, 3-point spread in favor of Arkansas. Arkansas is really fast, 20th in pace, but they have a 38% pass rate. I'll just watch the stats of KJ Jefferson. He came into last week banged up, played, which is a good sign. But this team just clinched bowl eligibility. They can't really improve their status here. So I'll just say this. KJ is not 100%. I expect him to play, but just watch pregame. Make sure he's out there because they might rest him for bowl week. Anyway, when he plays, he's awesome. 472 rush yards. He averages 240 nearly as a passer. 7,500 is a bit expensive on this slate, but you could certainly play him. No issues. Tough defense on the other side, but he's done the same thing against better defenses. Raheem Sanders saw his roll back. 24 carries last week. He's averaging 127.5 rush yards per game. Another 20 as a receiver. Raheem Sanders, awesome play, even in a tough matchup. Receiving game, I'll give you the routes because it's a little volatile. Hazelwood's played through injury this year. So last week, the routes for this team, it was 79% Hazelwood, 92% Matt Landers, 67% Trey Knox, 83% Keytron Jackson, and then Warren Thompson's kind of been benched. To rank them for DFS, I'm trying to get to either Landers or Hazelwood for the most part. Maybe a contrarian Knox, but probably not. Missouri, 94th in pace, 45% pass rate. Brady Cook's probably going to be popular because of price. 6,300 for Cook. He has 409 rush yards, averages 207 as a passer on 28.5 attempts. I don't love him as a player, but it's just so tightly priced, and he's secure that he's going to pop in some optimals, I would guess. Again, not done with projections. Cody Schrader continues to be the lead back here since they kind of benched Nathaniel Pete. Elijah Young didn't play, I don't believe, so watch that status, but you're looking for a cheap pseudo bell cow, Cody Schrader. He's now averaging 15 touches per game. That continues to rise. Awesome target share, too. He averages 4 targets per game in the last 4. That is Schrader. I think he's fine at 47. In the receiving game, Barrett Bannister got banged up, which is something to monitor. He had 9 targets, so you watch him. Dominic Lovett's the one on the year. Luther Burden's the 2. I think it probably mirrors that. I don't necessarily want to stack this team, but some of these guys aren't the most expensive. So your routes for Missouri last week, 62.5%. Lovett, 62.5%. Burden, 72%. Barrett Bannister, 81%. Toski Dove. Again, prefer Lovett and Burden. New Mexico, Colorado State. 2 teams typically not on the main slate. I would X this game out, honestly. 7.5 point spread in favor of Colorado State. 35.5 totals atrocious. New Mexico started Justin Holiday 2 weeks ago. They started CJ Montez last week. Both have decent mobility. Neither has a long leash. They could split during the game. No interest. Split running backs, Nathaniel Jones, Christian Washington. This team isn't good enough to take on any of that risk. What a disaster. Receiver, you have Jordan Porter and Luke Wysong as the top 2 options. Porter averages 39 yards per game, but he's 5,800. Like, give me a break with this. This is a team to X out. Clay Millen's the starter for Colorado State. It's an air raid for the most part. Like, this team is a 50% pass rate. They like passing when they can, but they haven't been very good at it. 96th in pace. Millen doesn't have any rushing ability. His stats are warped by revolving door quarterback. I don't think he's really interesting for DFS. So many guys have transferred out of this backfield that I think that there is some interest here. There's finally 7.5 point favorites. Avery Morrow had 23 carries 2 weeks ago. And then the only guy who really spells him is Jalen Thomas at 3K flat. Ajon Vivens and David Bailey both transferred. So Avery Morrow is a contrarian piece. I think you could get to 70 yards per game on the ground for him. Torrey Horton is awesome. He's 1,000 receiving yards, averages 91 per game. He's the main guy they look to in the pass game. And again, this offense has had a lot of transfers. They try to be an air raid. You might be able to get some cheap targets here. Routes, Horton's on the field every play. Justice Ross Simmons, 100% route rate last week. And the wide receiver 3 is Lewis Brown. He had a 97% route rate. The wide receiver 4, because it is such an air raid system, is Jordan Williams right now, 58% of the routes. Some of these guys are cheaper than others. Lewis Brown is the stone min option, so you can play him there. I probably don't want to play Jordan Williams, also the stone min. Ross Simmons is fine at 43. Horton is fine too. Nebraska, Iowa, another really low total game, 38.5, 10.5 point spread in favor of Iowa. Nebraska's fast at 34, but Casey Thompson being back is the biggest thing here. I don't want to play Thompson myself. He doesn't have any rushing, 236.5 rush passing yards per game, sorry. Anthony Grant's the lead back, 82 yards per game on 20 touches. Just such a tough matchup against Iowa. Low total. Their implied team total is 14. Do you really want to play Grant in this matchup? I personally do not. He doesn't have a lot of target upside either. So very, very tough to play. Trey Palmer is the only guy I really look to at this point. He's at 33.5% target share, 80 yards per game. Some of that just severely depressed by the backups. He had 60 yards in 3 games with backups once Thompson went down. So If you isolate the Thompson games, he's way more efficient. So contrarian Trey Palmer might make sense, but very little interest. For Iowa, slow, run heavy. Petrus is terrible. You can't play him in any matchup. They use a three-way committee at running back. So can we play a receiver? Their best pass catcher got hurt. Sam Laporta is out for this game. So Luke Leitchie immediately could be a guy we use at tight end. He's 3,200. He probably plays every single snap. Last week, Laporta only got to 23% of the routes before he got hurt. Leitchie immediately jumped up to 88%. So they already used him a ton. This is a 12 personnel team. So Leitchie's probably going to be the guy people look to. Nico Reganey has an 88% route rate. So he's viable too at 3,500. There's just cheap players that maybe we use for DFS. Brody Brecht came in as the wide receiver 2 then behind Reganey. Yeah, it's a mess, man. Maybe a Leitchie or a Reganey is a cheap option for DFS, but nothing else. And to close this out, we'll do UCLA Cal 10-point spread in favor of UCLA on the road, 61 total here. Not much motivation. UCLA is locked into a bowl, but can't make the Pac-12 title. Cal's dead walking, but UCLA, they're still playing hard. 13th in pace, 47% pass rate. DTR is 9,400, which is crazy expensive, but he has the dual threat ability to target. Good game total here. 543 yards on the ground on the year for DTR, 244 on average through the air. He's solid if you can get to him. It's just getting to him's the problem. Charbonnet is awesome too. I do think a lot of people are going to try to jam Charbonnet and Bijan. So Charbonnet, he's averaging 23 touches per game, 138 yards per game on the ground, and another 33 through the air. I'm trying to play Charbonnet just flat out. Then in the receiving game, Bobo is the 1, Casimir Allen's the 2, Michael Ezeki is the 3. He's actually the tight end. And then Cam Brown and Logan Loya rotate the 3. I think of this group, trying to get to Bobo, just the targets are so consistent with him. I would find the 300 from Casimir up to Bobo if possible. And Ezeki, after the 3 touchdown game, it came on 5 targets, so he got priced way up. I think he's too expensive. I'd rather play Cam Brown or Logan Loya. Wasn't going to, but I'm going to dig up the routes. Why not? We've done it for every other team. So UCLA's routes last week, Cam Brown 88%, Logan Loya 18%. Actually, glad I looked at that. Much more likely to play Cam Brown than as a cheap salary saver. Cal 58th in pace, 61.5% pass rate just because they suck. So they're always throwing. But Plummer's been horribly inefficient. Can't run. Only averaging 255.5 yards, or excuse me, 254.5 passing yards per game on 38 attempts. That's atrocious. Not playing him. Jaden Ott has a volatile workload, but he's the lead back when they're in semi-competitive games. 76 yards per game for him on the ground. Another 24.5 through the air. That's 18.4 touches per game. If this game is even remotely competitive, Ott should have a good workload. So for tournaments, he's live. I like this passing attack. You get a lot of really cheap targets. It's J. Michael Sturdivant, Jeremiah Hunter, and Marvin Anderson. Anderson is actually averaging 6.3 targets per game over the last 3, and he's 3,300. So as a value piece, he's fine. And then Jeremiah Hunter and J. Michael Sturdivant, much more involved. Sturdivant, 9 targets per game. Jeremiah Hunter, 7.6. They're essentially the same price. Slight preference to Hunter for me is the more efficient player, but I can't fault you for either. I actually like the receivers a bit here. I think it's fine for game stacks. But that'll do it for us for the Friday slate. Let me know what you think in the comment sections. And if you'd like to reach out, I'm available on Twitter at Matt_Gajeski. Otherwise, hit the thumbs up button on the way out. Subscribe to the channel. That helps us a ton. So if you've done that, thank you very much. Otherwise, we'll be back tomorrow with the Saturday main slate as well. A lot to get to. Make sure to check that out. But good luck, everyone. We'll see you then.